Today we're going to hear from Larry Sperlich. There might be a couple of sessions that come along with Larry. Larry is legendary in the company in that almost everybody that works here or used to work here was hired by him. He's known for his attention to detail, his thoroughness, and his persistence and tenacity to get things finished and finished right. I'm really looking forward today to hearing more of Larry's story. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
So Parkston, South Dakota. And then grew up on a farm about 10 miles west of Parkston.
So Parkston, give me where in South Dakota? Give me a frame of reference on that.
25 miles south of Mitchell.
Okay.
Or 90 miles southwest of Sioux Falls.
Got it. So where were you in birth order? Did you have siblings?
I have an older brother by about 8 years and a younger brother by 13 years.
All right, middle child.
Middle child.
That explains a lot.
I was a baby for a long time.
Yeah, you were. So did you go to where'd you go to school then? Was it a country school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Famous, I'm sure everyone's heard of it, famous Rocky Ridge number 29.
Okay. So so my dad went to a country school for a bit. So what's that like? How many kids were in the school? Talk about that.
Of course, 8 grades at that point, no kindergarten, and 18 students through most of my career going to that particular school.
How many teachers did you have in that time frame?
One.
And what was his or her name?
One of them, I think, was Mrs. Blackburn, but I don't remember real well. I've kind of forgotten that. I kind of remember the person. But in my first grade, I went to a different school, and then between first and second, we moved a few miles. That got me into a different school.
Okay.
And yes, you don't have to ask me. It was a mile walked uphill both ways.
Perfect. Well, you probably made that walk alone with the age spread of your brothers.
Yeah, the only time that my dad walked with me is during a severe snowstorm. He came to school to get me in the middle of the afternoon. It kept getting worse and worse.
Sure.
And we left and we're going to walk back home, of course, and got about probably a quarter mile from the school or so and physically could not stay walking on the road. And very deep snow.
Yep.
By the time he got off the shoulder of the road, it was just deeper as all.
Yeah.
And finally said, we're not going to make it. So there's a farm, and they had kids in school also, that was a quarter mile west, the other side of the school. So we went back there and we ended up spending 3 days.
Really? Wow. So what, do you remember the year?
Oh, that would have been in the neighborhood of 48, probably, 47.
Yeah. So then you graduate from that country school. Where'd you go to high school then?
Actually completed high school in Cedar Rapids after I moved out of South Dakota.
So talk more about that. That's a long bus ride. So how does that work?
So, things weren't quite the same at that point. So you had difficulty. And when I say farm, of course, it has no reference to what you see today.
Sure.
No electricity, no running water, but we did have an excellent deep well. It had the best soft water in the country. So that we did have. But money was very scarce. And my dad, he's a very small farmer, and one reason and other things weren't going real well. He decided to be a renter. He had the money at one point to buy a farm, but renting was so good, he decided just to keep on renting. That leaves you at the mercy of the owner says, well, this is what happened is
Sure.
I'm going to sell this farm, okay. And Dad had the first option to buy it, and no, we'll go and rent this other one. Well, that wasn't the same, and they could only keep that a year, and then he couldn't get good ground, and it just started going downhill from there. But in any case, back to your question, so I started working, and then in 62, conditions developed that I left South Dakota for Illinois, and then eventually got back to West Branch, Iowa City area. Completed high school there, and then took a bunch of other courses in school, and that kind of completed my first step of formal education, you'll say.
Sure. And so your dad farmed. Did your mom work outside the home? Did she stay home?
No, she's just a homemaker, taking care of the kids. I mean, again, it's much different then than now.
Right.
No particular way to work outside the home.
On the farm, was it just crops, or did you have animals too?
Yeah, at one point, my dad milked a few cattle, a few cows, and of course his main workhorses was a pair of literal workhorses that were named Mutt and Jeff.
Okay.
And boy, those were big, tough, healthy horses. But
Sure.
you know, he did a lot of his farming with the horses, and eventually went into getting into tractors. It's kind of hard to imagine when you're sitting here in 2022
Yeah.
farming with horses, really.
What was his first tractor?
I think his first one was probably a Model G or a Model D John Deere, but he may have had a Ferguson, but that was a type with steel wheels with the ridges on so they can steer it, and then lugs in the back wheels. It was a tractor.
Yeah, it was big time.
That's about all you can say.
Yeah.
You know, and a two-bottom plow was pretty darn good, twice as big as the one-bottom.
Yeah.
You know, and then if you had a three-bottom, and by the time the H&M Farmals came around, especially the M's, that was pretty good size, 15-foot disc. Wow, that was really making hay then.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe the last question about the farm. So do you happen to recall how many acres he farmed?
I think 80 in his best years. I think that was 80 acres that he had. And he did everything he could with a pair of horses, and then supplemented with the tractor.
Sure.
But he had to feed the horses anyways, and they didn't have to buy gas. So
Yeah.
you know, they could easily plant corn, and of course
It's kind of like pouring concrete with a crane bucket, crane in a bucket, because it's already there. Or you can get a pump.
yeah.
But yeah.
But the horses, you know, they really become a team, and you know, like my dad picking corn by hand, and he could do several rows wide as long as he could hit the wagon with the ears, and then there was a bang board on the other side of the wagon. But if he wanted the horses to go ahead, they knew what they were doing. They just told them whatever he told them, move. And I don't know if he said giddy up or if he had some other word, but
Sure.
they'd move ahead and whoa, and they'd stop, and he didn't have to handle. Interesting.
That is. All right. So your formal education concluded in Cedar Rapids. Then what?
Well, many supportive courses after that throughout a lot of my career. And while I was going to school, some of that was in Cedar Rapids, that is now Kirkwood.
Okay.
but I'd at that point working full-time and going to school full-time, getting caught up on education.
Yeah. So where'd you work when you were going to school? Where were you working?
At that point, I was working for Todd and Sargent, and I started for them in 1963. And the reason I was working in Illinois, several different companies, and decided that Donna's parents were in Ottawa and all of my family was in Parkston. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to be somewhere halfway in between.
Sure.
And so due to circumstances, which it'll make the story longer, but due to circumstances, I ended up applying for a job with Todd and Sargent. Well, of course, the first job was just 40 miles west of Ottawa in Princeton, Illinois. So I spent the summer there building a feed mill, but then stayed with them until 72 when I came to Allen Story.
Okay. So Donna, your wife, so she's part of this picture pretty early in the program. So where and how did you meet her?
Met her in Mitchell. She came back. She's living in Illinois, but came back. Her cousin still lives in Mitchell, and there were more people, more of her relation at that point. But she was there visiting, and I knew that cousin and her husband, and we rode motorcycle together and things of that nature, and that's how I got to meet her then. They were visiting, and
How old were you?
21
Okay.
at that point. Or maybe, it depends upon exact 2021.
So who was the aggressor in the relationship?
We have a discussion about that. I think it was her. She thinks it was me.
I love it.
You never agree on that.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So you met in Mitchell, and then did you date for a long time, or did you get married pretty quickly?
No, we got married. So we met in July and got married end of August. So we didn't date very long, but we had, since she was living in Ottawa, that's what got me to Illinois then.
Got it.
Just followed her home.
Yep. So to fast forward then, so you're in Cedar Rapids working for T&S in Princeton, and then and you stayed with them for 11 years?
10 years. We had a client in Hales and Hunter in West Branch, Iowa. And so I stopped working for Todd and Sargent when we got that project done and went to work for the Hales and Hunter and did maintenance work for them while I went to school. Then I went back to Todd and Sargent when I graduated. And at that point, I would have been in 69 and was fortunate to work on their first slip form feed mill in Sterling, Colorado. And the superintendent that I'd worked for, Russell Stevenson, he was significant in my career development. He shared an awful lot of information about slip forming. And so I had a lot of his experience by the time I actually did a physical for a slip form. Sure.
So were you a superintendent there? Did you do a slip as a superintendent at T&S?
That's what my duties were there. Prior to that, I was working on drawings for that job. And when I got out of school, that's what I did, is went to the office, worked in the engineering department.
Here in town then?
Yeah.
Okay.
For a little while. And then when we slipped that job, then I went out. But primarily, I was a superintendent for them from the beginning to the end.
Sure. So you ultimately made a decision to change companies. So what was that like?
Our oldest son, Alan, which is now 58, it was time for him to start school.
Okay.
And for Todd and Sargent, I'd always traveled for them, and whether it been Minnesota, Missouri, Illinois, wherever. And so we decided we're going to stop traveling as far as Donna and Alan was concerned. And so that's when he started school. And it became more logical for me to change jobs. And starting out for Alan, it was more in-town work.
Right.
Which changed, of course, over the years.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. So you were around at the JTS Allen Story Days.
Yep.
And Rod Peterson's talked a little bit about that. I mean, there's Jimmy Sodders, Donnie a little bit. So just talk through that, what you remember of that, even though you maybe entered sort of midpoint, but what was that transition like here?
Well, Allen Construction was established in March of '72, and Cliff Rogers and Jim Rogers and Eldon, those three had started working for Allen, and I think they were working on sorority, doing something on that. And I came to work April 10th of '72 and started building Sambos. They had the Sambos project. That turned into, I think, the Mandarin, and now a grassy vacant lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the first project for him, and that's when I hired Rod. He came to work for us while we were doing Sambos and was a timekeeper. He was too good, so the office thought he'd be better served coming in the office.
So there was Allen, and how long did Allen Construction exist, and then how did Story come to be?
So in the Allen Construction days, another partner was Gray Real Estate, and they did residential work also. I should throw in there, Bill Allen was actually hired to run the Allen Construction, hence the name. And then it was decided in '76 that Story Construction would be created, and Allen Construction went on his own and stayed in the residential and that type of work. And Story developed from there. And then in '82 was the last job that James Thompson's Sons actively had. And that was over at the power plant across the street. So then after that, it was all Story.
Were there many people that migrated from JTS to Story, or how did the people transition of that work on both the office and field?
In the field, Jim Sodders, Donnie Paris, they were working for JTS. Charlie Bell worked for JTS. Several others, Howard Williams, they were all working for JTS. And then eventually migrated over to Story after some years. Cliff Rogers was the first to migrate. He was superintendent on the Hilton Coliseum and experienced some health issues, and then decided to reduce his stress level of running large projects. So then that's probably what prompted him to go to Story than Allen at that time, of course.
Sure.
But I don't know that for a fact. I'm just supposing.
Right.
I know he had health issues. That's the story I've heard.
Yep. What was the ownership like at the time? Do you recall who was owning JT&S and or owning Story?
Woody Buck, Ted Hagen, Norm, Reese, Dean Porath, and Dick Johnson.
Did they own both or just Story?
No,
JTS and Story?
They were the JTS owners,
Got it.
and JTS owned Story,
Yep.
or Allen. And for a while there, Allen and Story, I'll probably just say Story from now on,
Yep.
had two classes of stock, was an A and a B, and B was non-voting, A was voting, and then eventually it all got transitioned over to Story.
Yep.
Pretty much as it is now, I'd reckon.
So you started as a superintendent, and you built a Sambos and built some things. So what was your career path through the company through time?
Superintendent, general superintendent, ended up, there's titles in between,
Sure.
and but ended up vice president of construction, I think it was, if I remember right, something similar to
Yep.
that. And at that point would have been Norm and Dick that would have been the primary stockholders.
Yep. When did you make the transition from superintendent to general superintendent? Do you recall like how long you'd been with the company?
Very early on. And the way that all worked out is, we got another job. Can you run that? Yep. Oh, we got another job. Can you run that? Yep. So pretty soon the superintendent title didn't actually fit anymore, and we started hiring more superintendents. That's when it actually changed. So that all happened probably, by the 76 range, mid to later 70s.
Yep. So you were maybe the company's first ever general superintendent.
Yes.
Yeah. So I came to work for the company as a student in 1990 and ended up staying on after I graduated in 91. I have some early memories of you. One of them is your computer literacy. And there were just some computers at the company at that time. It was still pretty new. And you were a Mac guy, or you were an Apple guy, and everybody else was a PC person. So we'll talk a lot more about construction methods and means and whatever. But what you have always been an early adopter, in my impression, and thrown deep on technology. So what are your memories of that?
Well, I should tell you, my first experience with computers was with Todd and Sargent when they were using punch cards. And it was, I suppose, obvious and a necessity that I learn gain computer skills. It was easier for me to do what I needed to do with Apple products rather than DOS. And I joke a lot about, finally DOS figured that out and adopted a lot of Apple characteristics. And then my main overall computer, because it had AutoCAD capabilities, was a Mac. And that took me quite a few years.
What do you use today?
Got a box, BOXX. But it's like mainstream. It's kind of taken over. I've gotten away from Apple products. I'd have to think about when, sometime in the 80s or so, 90s maybe. Sometime in that point that I went to just to be in the mainstream with what worked with the office. So if you followed the graduation of computers, I'll say in Story, their first one, of course, was the Burroughs that consumed a room. Then they had some leases and stuff like that. So that all progression through all of that. So at some point then it also was apparent that I need to get into the new computers and get away from Apple products because it was just more, programming is more consistent with what the office was doing.
Yep. So computers aside, or at least that part of it aside, boy, through your career, you saw a lot of technological advances in the industry. Equipment, machinery, et cetera. What were, as you reflect on it, what were some of the big gains or big changes that changed the way work happens?
Well, a couple of stages. And one, I'm fortunate to have had much manual labor experience, meaning if you want to hoist something, you may do it with a block and tackle, or you may use what used to be telephone company trucks that had a 18, 20-foot boom on the back, and telephone companies used to use it to erect their poles and stuff. So that was a main hoisting effort, and you would run, if you wanted to hoist something inside of a building, you would run snatch blocks around, attach it to columns, and eventually get up above your load and hoist it up. And if you didn't use the winch on a boom truck like that, then you might just run a cable out to a pickup and pull the cable with the pickup. Lots of taller buildings, like Ralston, Prina, and Iowa Falls, for instance, but most of them at that time, they always ran a beam out of a door on every floor, and you would hook a snatch block up to that and another snatch block at the base of the building, and then hook it on to pick up, and you'd hoist whatever you wanted, either up or down, motors a lot of times, and piece of equipment. So that was the main hoisting, and then we would erect, structural steel frames on the ground, bends on the ground, and then just hire a rental crane for 2-3 days. For an example, this is back with Todd and Sargent, in order to erect the taller structures and just to cut down the crane cost. So going to cranes is a big thing. And just in short, from that point on, the computerization that happened in the industry, it has been a very big deal, very significant. Just like with the cars, if you dabble in this a little bit, I think. So if you look at like a 1950 engine and look at a 1920 or a 2022 engine, there's a vast difference.
There is. Yep.
It's amazing.
Well, I'm sure you saw the practice of safety and the focus on safety change a lot in your career too. What did that look like?
Well, insurance companies, again, I'll go back to 65. That's when I began being a superintendent, so I was also at the beginning of being involved in safety and the insurance companies really pushing safety. And then until 72, when OSHA came about, of course, and took over. But it was insurance companies that drove that first. So as far as things changing, the equipment has changed. I'm not sure that safety has changed. The same problems today as you had then. And of course, the equipment and technologies, that's all different.
Right.
But it's still people and safety and planning to work and identifying hazards. And when you assign someone to go out and do a task, you need to be assured in your own mind that they have everything that they need within themselves, their knowledge, and the tools and equipment that they'll be able to complete that task safely in the way it's intended. And so none of that has changed. That's the same. And basically, and you train people. And it's also training the workforce to complete the work, as well as safety training. You do all the safety training that you want if they're lacking experience or knowledge in the trades. So it goes hand in hand.
Yep.
How do you perform the work safely and complete it with quality?
So speaking of hiring and recruiting, it's quite a thing today. It's quite a topic today to identify people, hire people, give them skills, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure it was quite a thing throughout your career. So where did your labor pools come from? Where did you have success in bringing people on? What were the struggles? What was it like to hire people when you were the general superintendent?
Same problems. And since I personally started being involved in hiring people, say in 1965, been looking for good people ever since. A big difference that we changed at Story, in my world, I'll say, it was always common for the superintendent to go out and start a job. Might go to Illinois or many places. As an example, it's Russ Stevenson I mentioned. And he'd go out there by himself, hire the entire workforce, local. And then that kind of progressed to where he was able to take me along for a few years until I was promoted. And so that gave him one backup, and it gave me an excellent opportunity for training. Then at Story, we tried to provide more support, more field people, more foremen, and develop that to help superintendents along. And even to the point of having multiple superintendents on a project, which at one point that was unheard of. You'd never do that. They didn't get along all that well either.
Some did, some didn't.
Right.
But you would, so where did people come from? Did they come back from war? Did they come off the farm? Did they come out of manufacturing settings?
Of course, it came from all areas, but what you'd really look for is some good farm kids that knew how to work. That's the ones you're after. And then it ranged all the way to, try to hire people out of penitentiaries and out of bars and wherever you can find people that could be reasonably productive and reasonably safe completing that work. So, a lot of times you wouldn't always get the best people that have a solid job and a solid family, and they're not, you're going to be here for 6 months, I think I'll give up my career and I'll come to work for you. That wouldn't make very good sense. So
sure.
You would have your labor pool from the others. And then times change, in the 80s or the great big, and even later 70s, awful big push on females and minorities coming into the construction industry. And, so we tried to work with that a lot. Over the years, back at that point, had some females that aspired to foremanship. But admittedly, a 100-pound female carrying a 100-pound EFCO form really didn't work that well.
Sure.
So you make allowances, you suit them for the job that and there's jobs they could do.
Sure. Yeah, a lot more of the work back then used to be done at the site. A lot of the clerical work, a lot of there was just a lot more site focus and less office focus, it feels like.
Right. Well, if you go back to Dick Johnson, his first job for JTS was timekeeper.
Yep.
And Rod Peterson was timekeeper. And so that was the trend at that point. And then we actively, instead of investing in timekeepers, we started investing more in field engineers and being able to help the superintendent more on the project.
You probably hired everybody at Story for everybody that worked on a site at Story for 25 years?
Oh, I'd have to think about that. Till in the 80s, as Story grew and superintendents grew, then they would tend to hire their own.
Sure.
And so that diminished that. At one point I can go back to where we didn't make a concrete pour unless I inspected the form myself first, and went from there to, I think at one point our record was placing 6,500 cubic yards of concrete a month in one given month when we were doing the Ames pollution control.
I got it.
But no, so as things change and try to share the load some.
Yep.
And, at that time, and I know things have changed a little bit, and there's always been HR people around in certain companies, but there's always something to be said about superintendent getting to know and hire the person that's going to work for him. And if you want to use the term to create that bond,
right,
and understanding might be a better term, is create the understanding and expectations.
So you, in your career, you saw, we're going to talk about projects, we're going to talk about people, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but what I'm thinking of is economic cycles and times of prosperity and times of distress. What do you recall, and how did the company need to respond in those times of prosperity and distress?
In the 70s, it was about starting this company and getting projects. And by the time 80 rolled around, and I'll give Norm Reese all of the credit for this, is he had the foresight to get into wastewater treatment plant work. So the first project was Pella, Sense Creek at Pella, and during that project and during the 80s, early 80s, we had every superintendent except for Donnie Paris, and he was at DeSoto Adele building a school. Other than that, everybody in the company was working down at Pella. So that's from 80 to 85, there was a big push with the federal government to upgrade the wastewater treatment plants. So that all worked out quite well, while a number of companies went broke, went out of business. In that period, Story grew immensely.
Okay. Any other memories of either boom or bust times in the economy, and how that impacted the company and how we did things?
Well, from the wastewater, it went into the water treatment. That was kind of a natural. That all happened primarily during the 80s. And on beyond that, in 95, it just ended up, we started getting into the pork packing plant work, and so that ran for a number of years. All of those, all pretty good years. Story doing, that was the intention early on, Story doing a lot of our own work. And that made us successful and could get us quite a few jobs.
A lot of your career was involved, that I recall, in the pork packing industry. How did we start that?
Well, that's not quite a true statement, but 25 years or something of it was, or 20.
Yeah, that I remember.
Yeah, that was a qualification,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
There was a person by the name of Jim Roth that worked for Excel, which was owned by Cargill. And because of our wastewater plant experience, I think that was the lead in 95, that down at Ottumwa they had a clarifier in their treatment plant that they wanted built. And I assume, and don't know exactly, I wasn't exactly involved in that estimating of that project, but I assume that we gave Excel a budget for it, or a hard dollar price, and they elected to have us build that, and then that's what started the packing plant bases. Then Jim Roth, he was a very strong supporter of Story, and he eventually talked us into going to work at Beardstown, Illinois, and during work over there, that's when Jim retired then, finally, but he was an excellent person. That's the kind of people that you can talk with and do business with. It's easy to do business with them. You know, you're just there to do the job, and they help, and you help, and it works out.
So we got on campus through the treatment plant, and they metaphorically brought us upstream in the plant then to do other things.
Yep.
So you talk about him as an owner with some reverence and appreciation. Who are some of the owners and design partners that you would put in a similar category as that?
Larry Olson, structural engineers, he's probably number one. And then Kyle, that Larry brought along, Kyle Lucina, Bill Ashton, in the soils and sheet piling, dewatering type of work that he's in, civil work. He's another that just absolute excellent people. You know, in reverse, you try to do what you can for them. It's just a good teamwork.
Yep. Any other owners that you served that?
Well, I'd have to think about that some. I'm going to say that every one is just pretty good owners that I was associated with. When we started working for JBS, excellent people up at Worthington, Jeff Beisman and his predecessor, and just good people to work for.
Sure.
Then we did some extremely difficult work up in Worthington that interestingly came about when they could not get a contractor to do this particular job, which was replacing second floor structure with a third floor structure in an operating plant. And our good friend Larry Olson, well, so they collectively, Olson was a structural engineer, and they were trying to get contractors to bid it and build it, and they were unsuccessful in that. So I'll say my good friend Larry Olson, they came down to the point where JBS was trying to figure out what to do, and they asked him what to do, and said, well, just tell a story, they have to do it. It's the end of that. Yeah, you have to do it. Well, we don't work on weekends. That's not what we're up to. Well, you have to do this. There's no one else. We did a subsequent job where over a cut floor, we replaced roof beams and roof while they're operating. And Dale Halford helped us on that. And so our first trip up there, and of course I should say that John Rogers was really instrumental in lots of this work,
Right.
along with Doyle Hayes, just excellent supporters. But so we took Dale Hofford up there one weekend and showing him what we're about to do. He's going to help us as a superintendent. We get halfway done walking around and telling him what we're going to do, and he says, well, they need to get another contractor to do this. I told him, Dale, we are the other contractors. There are no other contractors. And he still remembers that. But he did a good job.
Huh. Well, yeah, you've seen so much game film in your career in terms of different kinds of projects, different unique construction challenges that either we dealt with or somebody else dealt with. What's noteworthy as you look back and say, man, I can't believe we did that.
Every job has a story. You know, I don't think there's one of them that I can think of that, for me, and probably for the company, that there's probably a significant story. And some of that people really don't know. Like when we got Grundy Center, we did a vertical slip job on that pump station. And there's probably not very many people in the company know, oh, we do slip forms.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
We did. As an experiment, it broke even cost-wise about with using the EFCO plate girders, but EFCO plate girders is much more effective and easier to train people on. Better control, a lot of things going on with that. But yeah, we achieved that. And, you know, just many, many things.
So you hired a lot of people that hung with the company for a while, for a long time, for their career. What was your retention rate? Did people come and stay, or did a lot of people spin out or leave? Or
I don't know about a particular rate, but in overall in the 90s, end of 90s, you know, we were probably, as I recall, 280 employees or something like that. It is constant that you keep hiring and you have a few leave. Now, most of these have been the workforce, construction workers, and not necessarily superintendents. A lot of the superintendents stayed for quite a while, and Dick Johnson, he at a period he would had his hand in helping to find and hire superintendents also. Around in the 90s, he became a little bit more active in that, I think.
Sure. 280 people.
I think that's about what it was when we were doing St. Joe.
St. Joe and Iowa City, there was a little bit of overlap, I think, even in some of those. So you, when did you become an owner?
I would say I had Class B stock first, so I'm going to say mid 70s. So I don't know if it was with Allen or at the beginning of Story. I think there was some Allen stock. I don't recall that there was ever, no, I don't remember if there was a Class A and B stock on during the JTS days or not. But in any case, never owned any JTS stock. It was all Allen and or Story.
And was your first allocation a small allocation, or was it a big bite?
No, it was small. And at that point, we paid for it in our own means.
Yep. So when did you take some big bites? Who retired, or what were the events that led to that?
Probably Dean Porath and Ted Hagen. They were the most significant contributors to my stock. I'll say providers of. They were like everybody else, and I sold it for a fair price at that time.
When did you stop paying for stock?
I would say it was probably in that time period of Dean and Ted, I would guess. I don't exactly remember.
So in the 80s sometime, probably.
Yeah.
Yep. Because you ended up selling it in 2004.
Six. End of 6.
Yep. This is so good. We're going to have to reschedule. Or we'll have to schedule to keep going because I'll be curious to hear about influences on you. Clearly, this superintendent at TNS was. I'll be curious to hear about succession planning through time, or what that looked like, and the different ways the company organized and did things, et cetera, et cetera. Pearls of wisdom. I mean, so you know how this goes. So just think about things, because this is really easy listening, and there will be a lot of people that will listen to this. And you're doing great. Your recall and it's really great. I know there's a lot to say, so it's great. There's part 1 of Larry Sperlich's exit interview. What an upbringing, what a background of persistence and humility from South Dakota to really forming his own journey. Fascinating to hear about how he got from here to there. And I think that really forms a lot of who Larry became early in his career and who he has continued to become throughout his career. Looking forward to season 2.